Ever since Metroid Prime 3 wrapped up the trilogy on Wii, fans have spent years staring at the horizon, waiting for a new first-person adventure starring Samus Aran. But between smaller attempts on handhelds and a troubled development full of silences and restarts, it started to feel like we'd never see a real Metroid Prime again. But Retro Studios, with time, patience, and a lot of care, has managed to finish Metroid Prime 4 Beyond Nintendo Switch 2 Edition, a game that brings back the best of the original, updates it without betraying its essence, and adds new ideas while squeezing the power out of Nintendo's new console. After finishing Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, it's clear that Nintendo has brought the series back to the front line with more strength than we expected. Samus's return isn't just another one, but a brand new entry point into the saga, and honestly, one of the most special games in the libraries of Nintendo Switch and Nintendo Switch 2. Now, first things first, you don't need to have beaten the original trilogy to enjoy Metroid Prime 4 Beyond. Retro Studios has designed this entry as a perfect gateway, clear and accessible for newcomers, but familiar enough that veterans will feel right at home. From the very first cutscene, you understand who Samus is, what's at stake, and why this journey matters, without having to watch lore recaps on the internet. The adventure begins with Samus working with the Galactic Federation to stop the space pirates. Of course, everything goes wrong and our bounty hunter ends up teleported to the mysterious planet Viewros, separated from the crew and practically stripped of her abilities. So the objective is twofold: survive and escape the planet, but also find her people and figure out what the hell just happened. As tradition demands, Samus starts almost from scratch, but there's an interesting twist here. A native civilization on Viewros gradually gives her abilities back in the form of psychic powers. The classic abilities return, yes, but now they're tied to the planet and its mythology, which makes progression feel important not just for gameplay, but also for the story. Recovering a power is no longer just getting a new weapon, it's about better understanding the world you're trapped in. Metroid has always been synonymous with cosmic solitude, with Samus against the universe. But Beyond pushes against that idea a little bit without breaking it. The Federation and its members have more presence than ever, whether through communications, brief encounters, or small missions while everyone is scattered across Viewros. Samus is still Samus though, almost mute, enigmatic, always steady. But having voices around her gives the game more rhythm and nudges it closer to what we expect from modern narrative-driven titles. Of course, some players will miss the absolute isolation, but here the team clearly went for balance. The supporting cast never steals the spotlight, doesn't get annoying, and has enough personality for you to remember who's who. The star, however, is still the planet. The scan visor is once again key to telling the story, and Viewros feels like a place with culture, conflict, and history, not just a bunch of corridors and monsters. Honestly, it's exactly the evolution the series needed in terms of atmosphere and storytelling. You still feel lost in a remote corner of space, but now the adventure is a little bigger and more aware of its cast. We do miss having Samus speak in this adventure because the voice acting, used only for secondary characters, is so good that it feels really strange for the protagonist to just never say a word.
Ah, you want to go there.
Metroid Prime 4 Beyond plays a double role. It closes a chapter on Nintendo Switch and serves as a showcase for Nintendo Switch 2. The version we played is the new console one, and you can tell Retro Studios has focused the hardware jump on two things: reinforcing the gameplay side with rock-solid performance and dressing it up with visual upgrades that respect the project's origins on the previous system. The game offers two graphics modes. Quality mode goes all in on clarity, 4K and 60 frames per second on TV, 1080p, and 60 frames per second in handheld mode. It's not a monster in terms of polygon count or scale. It's still a fairly contained game, very much in line with what we'd expect from Switch, and that's probably why the optimization is so strong. No stutter, no weird drops, not even when the screen is packed with effects. Character and enemy models are relatively simple, and most environments are closed, tightly controlled spaces, except for one big exception, which is the huge open world area area, which also really never floods the screen with objects. Compared with other technical showpieces on Switch 2, it does look modest, but inside that simplicity, there's very careful work on lighting, reflections, and particles. You do kinda get the feeling that the console could have pushed more, but what's here runs like clockwork. Now, for those who prioritize absolute smoothness, there's also a performance mode that drops the resolution to 1080p on TV and 720p in handheld to hit 120 frames per second. Now, on paper, that doesn't sound like a huge leap, but when you're playing, especially with motion controls, you can really feel it. The response is almost instant, and the screen feels like a mirror of your movements. But in exchange, textures and some environmental details lose some sharpness. So in the end, it's really a matter of taste. Prettier or smoother? But both modes are well thought out and feel coherent. Metroid Prime 4 follows the same environmental approach of the original trilogy. A single planet with different themed zones, each with its own biome and personality, all interconnected. You will get to see classic types of areas from the series, but the big novelty is the huge desert region that becomes the game's central hub. From there, you can access the rest of the key locations. But that desert, Sol Valley, isn't just sand everywhere. It works as a kind of a void that reinforces a sensation of being lost on a planet where there apparently isn't anything, thereby giving Viewros an identity that sets it apart from other hub worlds in similar games. At first, it does look like a gigantic hostile wasteland, almost like staring at a picture of Mars and thinking, there's nothing here. But luckily, that impression is misleading. The key is that a large part of the game is actually hidden underground. Underground zones, buried structures, access points to other areas that open up as you progress. It's definitely a design that can divide opinions. If you enjoyed that oppressive sense of emptiness, you're gonna love it. If you prefer worlds that feel more filled in, you may find it too barren. Just like what happened with the Great Sea in The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker. Beyond's big calling card is its psychic abilities. These aren't just another set of skills. They're the axis that everything in the game revolves around. They're woven into the story, the gameplay, and even the visual identity. Aesthetically, the psychic powers bathe the game in purplish tones. Doors, mechanisms, structures, and key elements are marked with a clear visual language for the player. When you activate these abilities, the visor view warps, the HUD distorts slightly, and the environment feels different. It isn't just a pretty filter, it genuinely helps you read the world in new ways.
Wait.
Metroid Prime 4 Beyond justifies its existence by the simple fact that there's nothing quite like it in today's landscape. Yes, it is played from a first-person perspective and there's shooting, but it isn't a shooter in the usual sense. See, the focus here is on exploring at your own pace, getting lost, hunting for hidden paths, solving puzzles, clearing platforming sections, and almost memorizing the map. It's that classic 2D Metroid cocktail translated into 3D with a personality nobody else has managed to copy. Now, the core structure is still very Prime. You travel across the planet, visit new areas, pick up items that let you progress, and unlock upgrades for your suit and weapons. So on paper, it might sound like more of the same, but the combination of classic abilities with psychic abilities changes everything. What you used to solve with only missiles or the morph ball can now involve manipulating the environment, reading invisible patterns, or even playing with how you perceive a room. Backtracking is still key, but it's the good kind. You return to familiar areas with new abilities that open up paths, secrets, fights, and situations you never even imagined were there. That feeling of coming back somewhere and suddenly seeing 5 new possible routes is pure Metroid Prime, and here it's especially polished. The other big gameplay novelty has a name of its own: Viola, Samus's bike. Now this bike becomes your perfect companion for getting around the larger environments, especially Sol Valley. Sadly, you can't use it in tight corridors or small interiors, but as soon as the map opens up, Viola comes into play. Its existence makes sense and is kinda necessary. Without it, crossing that gigantic central desert would be a slog. But with Viola, moving around feels agile and satisfying, almost like surfing on sand, while also reinforcing the sensation that you're exploring a truly enormous area. On top of that, there are sections and small challenges designed specifically for the bike, which keeps it from feeling like just just a generic fast vehicle with no personality. Sol Valley is probably the most divisive element in the game. A central open world that, at first glance, seems almost empty. Some players will be reminded of the Great Sea in The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker. Long distances with few obvious points of interest for quite a while. But just like in that Zelda, the design is meant to make you feel small, isolated, and lost. Under the surface, there's a lot more going on than it seems, and the game knows how to reward anyone who takes the time to explore. You can finish Metroid Prime 4 Beyond in about 13 to 15 hours if you play relatively straight, but you can stretch it so much further if you want to grab every secret, upgrade, and collectible. It's not a short game, but it also doesn't overstay its welcome, so for as long as it lasts, it makes good use of your time. Now, in terms of difficulty, it strikes an interesting balance. On one hand, it is still demanding when it needs to be, and lets you make mistakes, get lost, and wander around until you figure out what to do. On the other hand, the Galactic Federation acts as a more organic hint system. Instead of a giant marker on the screen, you get squad mates who offer suggestions and tips about possible routes or solutions. For some, that might make this entry feel a bit more friendly than the classic Prime games, but it never breaks the core essence. It doesn't drag you by the hand, it just gives you a gentle nudge when it sees you're stuck. And for many new players, that might be the difference between giving up and falling in love with the formula. One of the smartest moves in the Nintendo Switch 2 version is the hybrid control scheme. You can practically switch on the fly between a super precise mouse mode and motion controls, simply by lifting or resting the Joy-Con 2. This mix of control styles is a small revolution. It lets you adapt to each situation however you like. For example, in intense combat, it can be great to use the mouse style mode for pinpoint accuracy, while for exploring and using the scan visor, the more relaxed, natural feel of motion controls is a joy. The configuration options are also extensive, so it's easy to find a setup that fits how you like to play. So yeah, you can really tell Retro Studios has put a lot of thought into how to take full advantage of the hardware in its first game for Switch 2. After so many years of waiting, Metroid Prime 4 Beyond isn't just Samus's return to first person. It's proof that the Prime saga still has a lot to say. It recovers everything that made the original special. The feeling of being lost in a remote corner of space, the slow, deliberate exploration, the scan visor telling the planet's story, and then wraps it in a modern presentation. Richer storytelling, side characters that add without getting in the way, and a new world, Viewros, that can stand proudly on its own. Beyond keeps that unique blend of first-person shooting, puzzles, backtracking, and platforming, and pushes it further with psychic abilities, the desert's design, and the Viola bike, all of which change how you think about the map and how you move through it. The dual graphics modes, hybrid controls, and level design round out an experience that feels as classic as it does brand new. But of course, not everyone's gonna be thrilled. Sol Valley can feel too empty. The soundtrack plays it pretty safe, and visually, it doesn't squeeze every last drop out of Switch 2's power, but most of the time you can tell these are conscious choices, not simple technical limits. Metroid Prime 4 Beyond is both a worthy heir to the original trilogy and one of the standout games in the Nintendo Switch and Nintendo Switch 2 lineup. It's more accessible for new players without forgetting those who have been following Samus for decades, and it brings back a style of first-person adventure that almost nobody else is making today. So basically, if you like Metroid, it's a must-play, and if you've never really given the series a shot, you're not gonna find many better doors into it than this. So what did you think of Metroid's return on Nintendo Switch 2? Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss upcoming reviews and videos about the console. Thanks for watching. See you next time!